Welcome to Manager Tools. This is Kate.
And this is Sarah.
Today's cast, the Tetris Workload Battle, part 1 of 2.
The questions this cast answers are, how much can I delegate? How can I overcome resistance to delegation? And do I have an obligation to delegate?
If you want answers to these questions and more, keep listening.
For teams who need to plan for 2025 training for their large groups and organizations, we've got the solution for you. You can license Manager Tools content and deliver our training internally. We will teach some of your L&D folks or HR staff to deliver our guidance and training, and then be there to support in the organization-wide rollout. We've created a model that works very economically for large teams. In fact, you can save somewhere between 45 and 50% off our normal training costs if you deliver it yourselves. For more information, contact Maggie by emailing her at customerservice@manager-tools.com today.
Most managers don't delegate nearly as much as we should, and certainly not as much as we could. We balk at any pushback from our directs, and there are good reasons for that, although perhaps the reasons to push back are not as good as the reasons to push down. There's just this constant battle between managers and their directs about workload, and I'm sure we all feel a lot of that ourselves as well. Unfortunately, the organization, your leadership, wants you to continue pushing work downward because of the delegation waterfall. It's a necessary part of how organizations are run. So we want to encourage you, and we're going to think about it a little bit differently today with a new analogy, if you will.
Yeah.
And we understand most managers feel like they're between a rock and a hard place when it comes to the team's workload. More work is regularly dropped on the manager and therefore essentially requested of the team. And we know that because the manager can't do it all themselves. If you're a manager and you're not delegating, you're putting yourself in a position of essentially inevitable overload, burnout, that kind of thing. I always think of it as you're the little boy with your finger in the dam and the water is rising. Even if you can't see the water, it's, if it hasn't topped the dam yet, it is still there. And managers often also feel that they can't give their team any more work because the team, while your boss is pushing work down from you, the team is constantly telling you how busy they are, which is, as people have heard me talk about before, something I never believe when somebody tells me about themselves. Yeah. But that's me. You don't have to that's my one place of cynicism, and you don't have to adopt it.
Yeah. And that's the thing. We all feel like to Kate's point, there's this compression, right? The people above us are giving us more. The people below us don't want to take on more. And maybe we don't feel like we ourselves are the only one that's experiencing this, but we certainly feel like if we are the frontline manager, we are the role in the organization that is experiencing this. And it is somehow wrong or not abnormal, but it shouldn't be this way. And we're here to help you understand the fact that, folks, if you feel that way, like you're being compressed between two layers, you are the meat in the sandwich, it is completely normal. The way you feel is normal. This is how it's supposed to feel. If you're a manager, you got to stop worrying that you're doing things the wrong way because of this feeling. That tension, that friction is a natural part of how organizations are supposed to run. So today to Kate's point, we're going to use an analogy. And we're going to use the analogy of Tetris, the video game. We're going to call it the Tetris Workload Battle. We're going to go through how to win the game and how to help your organization grow. We're going to talk about how growth reduces our chance of layoffs and increases opportunities for better jobs with more compensation and responsibility. And so the game is definitely worth playing.
We're going to cover a number of things today. Big outline. There is the Tetris Workload Battle. We're going to talk about how to explain the game to your team, encourage task time compression, encourage delegation to the floor, encourage prioritization communication, and then also how to reward those who play the game well.
Yeah, exactly. So let's start with lining up our analogy. When I saw this at first, Kate, I thought to myself, Tetris, that's dating us a little bit. But I think everyone knows what Tetris is. You, everyone, listener, are probably familiar with the arcade computer app game in which a series of blocks forming different shapes, like the letter L, letter T, letter I, or a square, cube even, drop down from the top of the screen. And the player, your job is to fit the blocks together as compactly as possible. If you don't line them up well, they will pile upon one another randomly without you doing any sort of standard cohesive lining up of things. And you'll take up a lot more space than if you had fitted them together nicely, kind of like puzzle pieces. Now, problematically, if your pile touches the top of the space which you are playing in, think of it as a tall rectangular container, you lose the game. The more falling blocks you're able to fit together, like puzzle pieces, causes them to take up less space, and therefore the longer you're allowed to play. And if you fill up an entire horizontal row with your blocks, all of those blocks will disappear, lowering the height of the stack, and thus reducing your risk of losing because your stack of blocks will not have reached the top. It will be continually decreasing in its height, thus allowing you to play longer.
What I'm about to share is definitely not necessary for your understanding of this podcast. And if you haven't watched the Tetris movie because you believe that it is about video games and therefore uninteresting to you or not part of your genre of interest, please go watch it, especially if you needed the explanation of how Tetris works that Sarah just gave us, because if you don't know how Tetris works, then this movie will be great for you. The Tetris movie is not about Tetris. It's about geopolitics, and it's fantastic, and it will teach you Tetris, but also it will talk about geopolitics, which is really great and really fun, and you should totally watch it. So, movie aside, fair warning, if you watch it, then you're going to get recommended some other movies. And I would absolutely recommend the Blackberry movie. I would not go as far as the pinball movie. Just putting that out there. Although the pinball movie is less about pinball and more about politics as well. So, interestingly enough. And I'm glad we chose this because not only is Tetris really cool, it's a really good analogy. Mm-hmm. It's a surprisingly good analogy for the situation most managers find themselves in when it comes to workload management. There will always be more work coming in, blocks being dropped into the space you're managing. And we learn pretty quickly that it's our job to figure out how to fit all that into our workspace, even though at some level, we know that the new work, the new Tetris box, will always keep coming. And that at some point, our work and playing space will be full, which likely initiates some sort of crisis for most of us. Then when you're a manager, if it isn't obvious, you have your own Tetris workspace, and you're also responsible for the Tetris workspaces of all of your directs. So it would be like playing Tetris on 4 or 5 screens at once.
Yeah, exactly. But having someone else do things on your behalf, way harder.
Yeah, if anything falls out of the bottom of your basket, your Tetris workspace, it falls into theirs.
Yes.
And then they get to move it around.
Exactly. And folks, if you've not figured it out yet, if you haven't been a manager for very long, I suppose, the size of your Tetris workspace can change suddenly. And it usually becomes smaller, meaning it's easier to fill up and then ultimately lose the game because we don't get all of our work done. So, for example, if your organization goes through a layoff, there will be less workspaces to play in because there are fewer hours. Suddenly, you might have to fit into a space that no longer exists. and you start failing. Or one of your key people resigns and you lose their workspace. Or none of your team departs, but someone else's team is cut and the work, therefore more Tetris blocks, falls into your space faster because you're making up for a gap in other parts of the organization. So if all of this sounds overwhelming or fatalistic, you should know it's kind of meant to. The analogy pretty well mimics the feeling most of us get about always seeming to have more and more work, never being allowed to get to a steady state where our workload is manageable. And we have time to spend on new ideas and thinking creatively about the future, or think about better ways of doing things. It kind of seems like, as a manager, we really never get to that because there's always more blocks falling on us. We're always just trying to survive. And because, if you played Tetris before, the game continually speeds up, does that kind of in reality too. You never get to a place where, whew, all right, let's just maintain now. Never. Doesn't happen.
Yeah. And that's our bad news. The good news is you don't have to be fatalistic in accepting the ever-falling Tetris workload. The effective manager knows that there are expert-level moves that can help you actually win this game.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Like cheat codes.
Like cheat codes. Yeah.
Tetris. So we're going to recommend that you explain how to play the game to your team.
Mm-hmm.
There are a series of ideas you have to communicate to help your team with this battle. We recommend you start reducing the tension between you and your directs regarding the Tetris workload battle by explaining what it is, how it works, and how you and they will respond to it. We're going to share this guidance in a way that you can use this in the form of a speech or a discussion in a staff meeting.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
About how to talk to them about it.
Yeah, exactly. Using this analogy will just help. I mean, if you're already with your eyes closed, seeing all these Tetris blocks falling, they'll be able to do the same thing. And it'll help them think through this what sometimes feels like a no-win situation and show them how to win it. So one of the first things, and one of those things that you definitely want to explain to your team to help them play this game is the Tetris workload battle is inevitable, normal, and never ending. They must understand that. Believe it or not, folks, this is how organizations are supposed to run. This is not some special curse that was put on us and only our division, in only our company, or in only this industry. All reasonably well-managed companies have a continual Tetris workload battle happening inside them every single day. To every single manager, to every single team that's there. If it's happening to you, it's happening to your boss, it's happening to their boss, it's happening to their boss. So don't think of this as this is just me and the levels below me. Everyone, the president of the company, has their own constant Tetris workload battle. We all do constantly.
It starts with the principle that all organizations want to grow. The reason for that is that companies exist to serve society. If a company believes in its products and services, it wants to share those products and services with more of society. Why would a company which makes a successful product only continue to make that one product, right? So this is why companies are always introducing new products and services, while in most cases continuing to produce products they previously designed and built. The easiest way to kind of thought exercise this is Apple. They started making just one type of computer, and now they make different types and styles. They also make tablets and software and headphones and reality glasses and phones and watches. We'd bet that Apple will bring out new products in the coming years, just like virtually every other corporation in the history of the world. And again, companies do this to more fully serve society, to make the lives of their customers better. They don't do this to simply make more money or profit, even though revenue and profitability are the most talked about metrics in companies. You shouldn't buy into the lie that companies exist to make money. They don't. Their revenue and profitability are only measures used to help understand and gauge the success of products and services. And you have to think as well about the fact that moving into these new areas, going from computers to cell phones, for example, is a series of decisions and, frankly, choices that the topmost level of the organization has to engage with. Somebody in the very middle doesn't get to say, hey, let's make phones and have that influence everybody. And the amount of effort it takes to spin up, let's say, factories that make phones is something that really, truly only the topmost level has the ability to do. So if we're going to do that, if we're going to move into a new market, then the person at the very top has to make some decisions. And in order to have time to do it, they have to engage in pushing some blocks down your way.
Exactly.
So when you think about the goal of trying to grow by serving society more and better, companies have 3 choices when it comes to the amount of work all of us have. They can either have too many workers, which reduces the strain on everybody. They can have exactly the right amount of employees for the work required, or they can have too few workers for the work to be done.
Exactly. Now, imagine you are the president, right? You're running the organization. You're thinking through these 3 choices that we've got. Well, you can figure out that it would be incredibly difficult for companies to have the exact right number of workers so that everyone can avoid having stresses and challenges, which means that every company really, because achieving that perfection when the amount of work is constantly changing is basically impossible. We have 2 options, really, 2 reasonable options, if you will. That is, we can either have too many or too few workers. Now, if a company has too many workers, profitability is reduced. This is dangerous for the organization and the people that work in that organization. If demand is reduced, either due to products becoming obsolete or an economic slowdown or whatever it may be, if you have got too many people and there's already some extra people who aren't fully busy in your organization and things slow down, whereby your profits are decreasing, it's even harder to pay the salary of all of those people. And what that means is layoffs. Layoffs are just a different form of stress for workers. Everybody has an easy job, and then some no longer have a job because they've been laid off. So I suppose that's an option. I don't think one of us or any of us want to take the option where we have a bunch of people and we're just laying individuals off constantly. It's not the right choice. The only reasonable option is for companies to have too few workers to accomplish all of the possible work that needs to be done. And if you're going to do that, it's going to cause the Tetris workload battle. We're always going to be slightly and maybe even sometimes significantly understaffed. We recognize this creates a stress for the people within the organization, but it is the most reasonable stress for a company to choose when trying to provide more service to their customers and to society. Remember, folks, these are the things we want you to make sure you are telling your directs. We are always going to have more work to do than we can do. It's normal. It's how it's supposed to be.
Believe it or not, this is supposed to be a powerful motivator for those employees that are part of the organization. Maybe it's not always motivating.
Yeah.
And the employee who doesn't have enough work to do gets bored.
Yeah.
And I know that game. I have been on teams where there were lulls. It's pretty draining. For the employee, for the team member, it gets a little demoralizing too. They tend to create friction fighting for the work that does exist because many people do actually want to grow their responsibilities
Mhm.
and income. They don't like to sit around all day doing nothing. They develop skills then that are in alignment with what the company wants to achieve
Mhm.
in lieu of having real work to do.
Mhm.
It's not a great situation
Yeah.
to be in, to not have enough to do.
Yeah, it might sound great when you're underwater. I mean,
Yeah.
because you've never experienced it before. To Kate's point, so few of us have ever experienced that you don't really realize all the negativity that comes with that situation. You just don't, and you can't.
It's psychologically stressful too,
Yeah.
because especially if you're on salary and you're in that time of a lull, it's psychologically stressful to understand that you're being paid the same amount of money and that you don't really have enough to do to feel that you're providing the organization a workload that reflects the salary that you're being given.
Yeah.
Once you become comfortable with a certain amount of work, going down into that lull, that dip, it's supposed to feel good.
Yeah.
You're thinking to yourself, oh, that would feel really nice to not be constantly fighting to get everything done at the end of every day. And that's not my experience at all. My experience is that it's actually psychologically quite frightening
Yeah.
to realize. And it, to be frank, it should be a little bit, because the logical outcome of too many workers, as you pointed out earlier, is layoffs.
Yeah.
That's why it's psychologically
Mhm.
frightening to be in a position of not having enough work to do.
Yeah.
So even though you dream of it, it doesn't feel good when you're in it. Even though right now, it's just the grass is always greener.
Sure.
If you're drowning right now, you think to yourself, gosh, it'd be great if there was less water. The problem is sometimes there's also too little water.
Yeah.
And people die from that too.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
not enough work, not good. But also
Right.
the other is not
Yeah.
that great.
When an employee has too much work to do, they're supposed to learn how to do more work in the same amount of time. They're supposed to learn to teach the people on their team, their direct reports, how to do the work that they are doing, so work can be done at a lower level. And this, folks, this is a form of development at a reduced cost. We're helping our directs learn what it means to be a manager. These are some of the things a manager does before they become a manager. And because generally they make a little bit less money than managers, it's being done overall by the organization at a lower price point.
Mhm.
And if you're interested in this concept, it's called managerial economics. We have got a podcast. I actually believe it's a very long podcast. It's many parts podcast. It's called Managerial Economics 101 that talks through that whole situation where the organization is expecting people to push work down in the organization as a way to get more done at a lower cost and ensure the right, most important things get done within the organization.
Mhm. This is another one too, Managerial Economics 102,
I think you're right. Yep.
for people who are interested in this concept.
Mhm.
And if for no other reason, the podcast is helpful in helping a manager who's learning about delegation understand
Yeah.
that delegation gets a bad reputation.
Oh, absolutely. We think of it as punishment. That's something I say a lot at our Effective Manager Conference. The first thing you got to do, managers, is stop thinking about delegation as being punishment.
Mm-hmm. I think it's sometimes helpful to remind ourselves that even the work we don't like to do, somebody else likes to do.
Yeah.
The most common one, of course, if you're listening, is if you don't like to go to meetings, surprise, there's a lot of people who do.
Yeah. There's a lot of people who like leading meetings too.
They love to go to meetings.
Oh, yeah.
because
They just want to be the
humans.
center of attention. Please, can I stand up in front of people? There are definitely people in this world like that.
That's where their friends live, at the meetings.
Yeah.
The Managerial Economics podcast, though, reminded me when I was feeling, delegation is negative, as a negative thing, because I was getting a lot of input about like delegation's not great.
Mm-hmm.
Those podcasts reminded me of why it is valuable. And once you can see like the whole landscape around delegation, it's a lot easier to feel confident in doing it and not
Mhm.
think so much about the negative, which most of those perceptions I find come from individual contributor or frontline manager experience rather
Yes.
than the experience of managers past that level. A manager past the frontline level, my experience is that they feel a lot differently about delegation. it's again, that military crest thing. It's kind of the different perception that is achieved when you realize the intricacies of increases in compensation and how those occur.
Mm-hmm.
When you're an individual contributor or a frontline manager and you lack understanding of those processes, people can feel really negatively about how hard it is to get a raise or get a promotion. Once you start to understand what that looks like from the inside and why it looks that way, my experience around it completely changed. And I found the same to be true about managerial economics and delegation.
Oh, yeah. And we oughtn't be surprised that individual contributors and maybe that front line have that impression. We talk constantly about the fact that managers, first-time managers, we're not trained to do this job. They're just figuring it out. So if they had that negative experience with the receiving of delegation, it's no wonder they're not teaching the people on their team what delegation means or looks like, or why it's important to the organization. So there's no surprise that there's this consternation, if you will, at that level. And then people understand more as they move up in the organization because they've been doing it long enough. They've figured out how, even though the organization didn't really help them figure that out. It was just experience teaches us at some point.
Technically, the organization helps by virtue of its systems, right?
Its existence.
There are organizational pressures and systems that are both necessary and reasonable for organizations to succeed. And you're forced to learn this as opposed to told it in advance or having it explained as it's happening. And so the experience is a little bit more negative than it would need to be, because really these organizational systems, the success of the organization, that all really boils down to we're always going to be given more work to do. Because we need to be profitable to fund new growth and attract capital. The organization wants less employees than might be ideal, because ideal is impossible. It would change daily. That means all of us have to learn how to work in a system that never stops giving us more work to do. Your job then in the Tetris workload battle is to accept more work and learn how to manage it well.
Exactly. So yes, folks, going back to that section of the show notes, make sure you walk through. Obviously, that wasn't a script that you could read to your folks, but those are some of the high-level things that we would encourage you to let them know, walk them through, give them insight into, because none of these things, some of these things are new to you, these concepts. None of these things are known to them. And again, that compression feels problematic when it's actually by design and completely natural. And when you start to realize that, it just makes the whole battle that much easier to deal with.
Next month, we're hosting a virtual public EMC starting on January 14th. If you're looking for guidance on how to be a good manager, come to our 4-session online event delivered via Zoom. Learn one-on-ones, feedback, coaching, and delegation from the comfort of your own office or even your own house. Sign up at manager-tools.com/training. That's it for today, y'all. We'll be back next week with a continuation of this topic.